What if the calmest water you've ever seen was hiding the deadliest drop on Earth? In the far northeast of Mexico lies a blue circle so still, so perfect, you could mistake it for a painting. No current, no waves, just a mirror of sky and grass. Locals call it El Zacaton. Divers call it something else, the abyss that swallows even the best. On April 6, 94, a man who had already done what most thought impossible stood on its edge. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't chasing fame. By day, Sheck Exley taught high school math in Florida, but in the world of extreme diving, he was a living legend. The first man to break the 800-foot mark on scuba, the author of the book that became cave diving's survival Bible, a diver who planned for every possible failure and then made backup plans for his backups. That morning, he zipped up his dry suit knowing there was no margin for error. He and fellow diver Jim Bowden had spent almost a year preparing. Their goal wasn't a record, it was to find something no one had ever touched, the true bottom of Zacaton, a vertical shaft plunging over 1,000 feet into total darkness. The deepest known water-filled sinkhole on the planet, a place so hostile that even the most advanced sonar had failed to map its end. At 9:50 a.m., the water was glass smooth as Exley slipped beneath the surface. No crowd, no applause, just the sound of his own breathing, and the slow hiss of bubbles rising toward the light. He was about to find out whether preparation could beat the kind of silence that crushes steel, and sometimes the human mind. In the world of extreme diving, there are names people speak with casual respect, and then there are names they lower their voices for. Sheck Exley was the latter. By the early 90s, his reputation was unshakable. He wasn't just good. He was the man who set the standard for what good meant in technical diving. He had logged more than 4,000 dives, many in places that most divers wouldn't even consider entering. Not shallow coral reefs with postcard colors, but black silt-filled tunnels where one wrong fin kick could bury you in zero visibility. Not warm, tourist-friendly lagoons, but deep, narrow shafts where a diver could barely turn their shoulders. And yet, even in the worst conditions, Exley had a gift that set him apart. He never seemed to panic. Divers who had trained with him remembered how he could respond to a flooded mask, a failed regulator, or even a complete blackout of lights with a slow, methodical calm. If the abyss could feel fear, it would have feared him. His accomplishments were staggering. First person to pass the 800-foot mark on scuba. At the time, it was considered beyond the safe limits of human endurance. Number 1, author of Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a survival guide still used to train divers decades later. Number 2, pioneer of safety protocols that remain standard today, from equipment redundancy to gas management rules. Number 3, veteran of countless rescues and recoveries, entering dangerous caves not for exploration, but to bring home those who hadn't made it out. But perhaps most importantly, Exley wasn't reckless. He didn't see caves as something to conquer. They were puzzles to be understood. His approach was almost mathematical. Break a dive down into manageable steps, prepare for every foreseeable failure, then prepare for the failures you couldn't foresee. He kept meticulous logs, documenting everything from water temperature to the exact feel of the current. His gear was always double-checked, his gas calculations triple-checked. For him, every dive was a problem with a solution, and he was determined to solve it. And yet, even the most prepared diver knows one truth. The deeper you go, the less control you truly have. At extreme depths, even the smallest oversight can snowball into disaster, and the human body is fighting a battle against physics that it can't win forever. That's what made Zacaton so tempting to him. It wasn't just about the depth record. Exley had already achieved that. It was about venturing into a place where no one had touched the bottom, where the map stopped and the unknown began. A place where the answer to how deep does it go was still waiting. For the cave diving community, there was a strange comfort in knowing that Sheck Exley was out there, setting an example of how to explore the most dangerous environments with precision and respect. From a distance, Zacaton barely announces itself. You could drive past the ranch that hides it and never know you'd just skirted the edge of one of the most extreme natural formations on Earth. There are no tourist signs, no souvenir stands, no railings for safety. Just the sound of wind sweeping over the limestone flats, the occasional call of a bird, and the stillness of the water waiting below. The sinkhole is framed by pale cliffs streaked with mineral stains, their edges softened by patches of scrub grass. Floating on the surface are thick mats of vegetation, small drifting islands that shift lazily with the breeze. The water itself is unnervingly clear. On a bright day, you can see a startling distance into the blue, but not far enough to glimpse anything like a bottom. The color changes as you look deeper, turquoise fading into cobalt, then into an inky blue so dark it swallows the light whole. It's this contrast that unsettles even seasoned divers. On the surface, Zacaton is a postcard. Underneath, it is an open elevator shaft into the planet's crust, measured at over 1,080 feet deep. It is the deepest known water-filled sinkhole in the world. Unlike most caves that narrow, twist, or constrict as they go down, Zacaton doesn't bother with that. It's a vertical drop, unbroken, like an inverted mountain peak, an upside-down Everest. The first serious explorations in the early 990s were cautious. Divers lowered weighted lines to measure the depth, expecting to hit rock far sooner. The lines just kept sinking. Instruments confirmed the same thing. There was no bottom in sight. And then came another oddity. The water was warm. Not the icy chill that grabs at your skin in most deep caverns, but a geothermal warmth, the kind that feels inviting until you remember that it's the product of volcanic activity lurking far below. No current, no silt storms, no swirling eddies, the kind of conditions that, on paper, might make for an easy, ultra-deep dive. But divers know that easy is a lie. Still water is a siren song. It lulls you, tricks you into forgetting the sheer danger of where you are. In Zacaton, there's nothing to slow you down, nothing to catch you if you lose buoyancy, nothing to grab if you need to stop. It's that deceptive calm that drew Sheck Exley here. This wasn't a cave you could bluff your way through. It demanded exactness, it demanded calculation, and it was the kind of challenge that a man like Exley could not ignore. But what makes a trap truly perfect is not the danger you see, it's the danger you don't. And in Zacaton, the danger waited not in the walls, but in the depths where pressure, gas, and time could conspire in ways no diver could ever fully control. By the morning of April 6, 94, every possible detail had been rehearsed. For almost a year, Sheck Exley and Jim Bowden had been preparing for this moment. Every dive leading up to this one had been part of a larger plan, testing gas mixes, refining descent speeds, and rehearsing decompression stops until they could run them from memory, even in darkness. This wasn't a dive you could do by feel. Zacaton was too deep for improvisation. Each man would dive alone, following his own guideline from surface to depth. The separation reduced the risk of tangling in each other's lines, a nightmare scenario in a vertical shaft where there's no place to maneuver. Along their routes, ones of decompression tanks waited at exact depths, secured with careful precision. Each tank was labeled with its contents, ready to be switched at the right depth to keep their breathing gas balanced. Their systems weren't standard scuba. They were using open-circuit rigs with custom blends of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen, meticulously calculated to counter the mental fog of nitrogen narcosis and the seizures caused by oxygen toxicity at extreme depths. But even with this technology, they were walking a razor's edge. No one had ever returned from the true bottom of Zacaton. The dive was operating at the very limit of what the human body could survive. At 9:50 a.m., the team gathered at the water's edge. The surface was so still it seemed frozen in place. The only sounds were the hiss of regulators being tested and the occasional splash as gear was adjusted. Both men checked their equipment for the last time. Not just the obvious things, but the small details. A valve's position, a hose's curve, a gauge's reading. When you are diving this deep, the smallest oversight can become the last one you make. They swam through El Pasaje de Tortuga Muerte, the passage of the dead turtle, a 600-foot tunnel that connected the outer pond to the main shaft. The nickname wasn't a joke. Divers gave it that name because even the hard-shelled reptiles that tried to cross it didn't make it out. Inside the tunnel, the water felt heavier, more oppressive. The light dimmed with each stroke until it became a faint green haze. Then the tunnel opened, and they were in Zacaton proper. The cenote yawned below them, a perfect vertical drop into darkness. They floated side by side for a moment. No chatter, no last words. At this depth, everything had already been said in the planning. They descended. Bowden's plan was to drop fast, about 100 feet per minute, making precise gas switches at pre-planned depths to keep his body chemistry stable. His movements were deliberate, economical, no wasted motion. At roughly 800 feet, he caught a faint, ghostly glow to his left. The beam from Exley's dive light diffused in the haze. It was the last time anyone would see him alive. Bowden kept going, but something was wrong. His breathing felt heavier. He checked. His gauges, his gas supply was burning faster than expected. At 9 to 25 feet, with tank pressures falling into the danger zone, he made the call no diver wants to make. He turned back. The ascent from this depth wasn't simply swim up. He had to stop at each decompression stage, waiting as nitrogen bled from his body, watching the clock with the patience of a man who knew that rushing could mean a fatal embolism. Meanwhile, far below, Sheck Exley kept descending. His dive computer would later record a maximum depth of 906 feet. Then the data stopped. No ascent profile, no emergency rise, just nothing. It was as if Zacaton had simply taken him. When rescuers finally reached Sheck Exley, the scene they found didn't match the profile of a diver who had fought for his life. His body wasn't tangled in his guideline. His hands weren't clenched in a desperate grip. There were no gouges in the rock, no cloud of disturbed silt, no sign of a struggle. Instead, he was positioned gently against the line, as though he had wrapped himself there intentionally. For a man who had trained thousands of divers to survive under pressure, the absence of chaos was almost haunting. The cave diving world was left with questions and theories. The first suspect was high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS. This rare but dangerous neurological condition can strike without warning during ultra-deep dives, especially below 500 feet. Exley had experienced it before. On a 983 dive to 863 feet in South Africa, he'd felt the onset: tremors, muscle spasms, double vision, mental confusion. At 900 plus feet in Zacaton, HPNS could have slowed his reactions just enough to prevent him from correcting a small problem before it became fatal. Then there was carbon dioxide buildup. Divers call it the silent killer because it creeps in unnoticed. If breathing becomes slightly labored due to exertion, stress, or equipment configuration, CO2 can accumulate in the blood. At depth, the body's ability to expel it is reduced, and symptoms like dizziness or confusion can cascade into unconsciousness. Combine that with oxygen toxicity, another constant threat at extreme depths, and the result can be instant and catastrophic. One bad breath and the lights go out. A third theory points to gas switching error. Exley's primary tanks were found empty, and some believe he might have switched to a gas mix stage for a shallower decompression stop, something far too oxygen-rich for the depth he was at. At that pressure, a single breath of the wrong mix could trigger convulsions, and without functioning gas, buoyancy control is lost. In a vertical shaft like Zacaton, that would mean sinking steadily, with no way to stop. Yet, even these explanations leave one thing unanswered: the calm. Divers who examined the recovery agreed. If Sheck had realized he was doomed, he didn't fight. They believe he made a conscious choice to anchor himself, stabilize, and accept the inevitable. To those who knew him, it fit. Control wasn't just part of his skill, it was part of his identity. One detail stands out. A single tank still had gas. That meant he hadn't completely run out. The guideline was intact. The equipment showed no frantic damage. Everything pointed to a man who understood exactly what was happening and decided to meet it without panic. In the cave diving world, that possibility is both chilling and oddly comforting. Chilling because it means the man they all considered indestructible still met his match. Comforting because, even in death, he was exactly who they believed him to be: disciplined, deliberate, and in control. The mystery remains unsolved, but one thing is certain. The last moments of Sheck Exley's life are etched into the collective memory of divers everywhere, not because of how they ended, but because of the calm with which he faced them. 11 years after Exley's final dive, another man would step into the same kind of silence, half a world away, in the heart of South Africa's Kalahari Desert. From the surface, Bushman's hole looks harmless. A still pond, tucked away in a barren landscape, surrounded by dry rock and empty sky. But beneath that placid surface lies a black vertical shaft that plunges almost 900 feet straight down. No current, no light, bone-numbing cold. And at nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, the altitude makes every breath harder before a diver even gets wet. For those who dare to enter, the real battle isn't just depth, it's physics itself. This was where Dave Shaw came to test his limits. A commercial airline captain by profession, Shaw had only been cave diving for about 5 years, but in that time, he had earned a reputation for discipline, physical fitness, and an almost surgical approach to risk. He wasn't interested in fame or setting records for their own sake. He was after mastery, doing the impossible, but doing it right. In October 2004, Shaw descended to 86 feet on a closed-circuit rebreather, a feat that set a world record for that type of gear. But it wasn't the depth that left him shaken. It was what he found waiting at the bottom. Floating eerily upright in the freezing water was the body of Dion Dreyer, a 20-year-old diver who had disappeared in Bushman's hole a decade earlier. Preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor water, his body looked as though it had been frozen in time. Shaw didn't panic. He calmly clipped a line to the harness so he could find it again. And as he ascended, one thought crystallized in his mind. I'm bringing him home. That decision would set the stage for one of the most haunting recoveries in diving history. And, like Sheck Exley before him, Dave Shaw would discover that some missions demand more than even the best preparation can give. January 8th, 05. The air was cool in the Kalahari morning, the water perfectly still. On the surface, it looked like any other dive day, but everyone in Shaw's team knew the stakes. This wasn't a record attempt. It was a recovery mission, planned with the precision of a military operation. Alongside his close friend and dive partner, Don Shirley, Shaw had assembled a support crew of 8 backup divers, surface coordinators, and even a cameraman, Gordon Hiles, to document the effort. Every stage had been choreographed: gas switches at exact depths, decompression stops timed to the minute, redundant breathing systems in place. Surface Marshal Vera Van Schaik, herself a record-breaking diver, kept watch topside, monitoring every step of the plan. The descent was uneventful. Shaw reached Dreyer's body at nearly 900 feet, just as he had during his record-setting dive months earlier. But this time, the goal was to bring the young man to the surface. As Shaw worked, he began placing the remains into a specially designed body bag. That's when physics struck back. After a decade underwater, Dreyer's body had changed. Gases from decomposition had built up inside his dry suit, making him unexpectedly buoyant. The moment Shaw tried to move him, the body twisted, limbs floating upward, the harness rotating. In seconds, lines tangled, the bag snapped. Parts of Shaw's own rebreather loop caught in the mess. At that depth, with the crushing pressure and the narcotic effects of the gases in his system, the mind slows. Task overload becomes lethal. Shaw tried to work methodically, freeing a strap here, adjusting a hose there, but each move seemed to tighten the knot. His breathing stayed calm, deliberate. There was no thrashing, no frantic grabbing. The helmet camera, recovered later, would show those final moments. Steady hands, measured movements, until oxygen began to run thin, and the reality of the situation became clear. His last recorded words, spoken into the slate for his team to find, were stark in their simplicity. Dave not coming back. There was no fear in the handwriting, only acceptance. Above him, Don Shirley was fighting his own battle. He'd descended to assist, but found himself in the same tangle of lines and crushing pressure. Barely holding on, he looked down one last time and saw Shaw's dive light fade into the blackness. Then it was gone. 10 hours later, the cave surrendered both men, Shaw and Dreyer, still tangled together, still connected. The mission was complete, but the cost was absolute. Sheck Exley and Dave Shaw never met. They came from different continents, different backgrounds, and even different eras of diving technology. Yet in the end, they shared something rare, a willingness to face the most unforgiving environments on Earth, not for glory, but for something deeper. For Exley, Zacaton was the final frontier, a mystery that had resisted even the most skilled divers. He didn't descend for a record or applause. He descended to understand, to map the edges of human possibility. For Shaw, Bushman's hole wasn't about personal achievement at all. It was about bringing someone home, closing a decade-old wound for a grieving family. Both men were masters of control, men who approached the abyss with precision and discipline. And both met their end not in chaos, but in calm. No thrashing, no panic, no desperate fight against the inevitable. In their final moments, they embodied the same truth, that at the edge of human limits, survival is not just about skill, but about accepting the reality in front of you. The caves they entered still remain, silent, patient, waiting for the next soul willing to test their depths. Zacaton still reflects the Mexican sky. Bushman's hole still lies hidden in the Kalahari. And somewhere far below those still surfaces, the echoes of two divers' final breaths linger like whispers in the dark. At such depths, there's no room for ego, no space for second chances, only presence, only intention. And whether you believe they chose their fate or the abyss chose it for them, one thing is certain. Both men went further than most of us would dare, and they did it with eyes wide open.